My uncle just arrived.
Hello, welcome back to Anti-Imperialist America. I haven't lived in a while. I am Dust James, the Marxist-Leninist trucker. For a few brief moments, you saw Comrade Alex Suarez, who's getting a ride back to his location. I think he's traveling journalist in Miami. He's going to give us live report about the Alex Saab case. That's very exciting. We can't wait to have him back on here. He actually arranged our other guest here, Lucy, at Lucy Can 22. Um, Alex would be better at introducing you. So if you could introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. My name is Lucy. I had a YouTube channel similar to yours, which is I'm not keeping it up anymore, called Blue Moon Red Wine. And I'm on Twitter. My handle is LucyCan22. And I know Alex from another organizing event. He was like talking to me all about Alex Saab and stuff at that event. And I'm also in AOC's district, and I had that idea for a write-in campaign against AOC, which I'm still trying to accumulate support for. I'm still trying to see who the Greens will nominate, if they're going to nominate a candidate at all. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm just kind of hopping on other people's show and trying to help out where I can.
Right on, right on. That sounds great. So we're kind of in opposite ends of the country. I'm in North Carolina. You're in AOC's district. Some of the local Democrats around here. Um, we're in the Black Belt South. Um, a lot of the Democrats here are pretty much right wing of AOC. I mean, our local lead Democrat in the county actually said, "No, AOC doesn't represent us. She's making us look bad." And we have to they were saying they wanted to distance themselves from them. And I look at AOC and I always say they're even. I'm going to curse. This is my show. Even they best ain't shit. Essentially, those within the imperialist camps are imperialists. They're the imperialist sheepdogs. People can go back and watch my stuff talking about that. But how do you feel about that? Like, a lot of people attack AOC for negative reasons, because of bigotry, because of sexism. Um, why do you see the need to oppose her from the left, and what are some good strategies on that?
Okay, well, the important thing would be really to oppose her from the left. I think a lot of people have some criticisms of AOC from the Republican side. It doesn't really go down as well here because this is like kind of a strongly Democratic district, and a lot of the, just like more hateful remarks like AOC is stupid and she doesn't know what she's talking about, that kind of thing is seen as very patronizing, very offensive to like a younger woman of color. This whole kind of thing doesn't work. However, I don't actually think AOC is left. I think she's a sheepdog for the Democratic Party. I don't think she's done very much for the district, if anything at all. And I really think she basically used these popular movements to kind of Teflon and like become a celebrity, which is the same thing people all over the country are criticizing her for, is the same thing people criticize her here for. And here it's actually very visible, because this is like an area that's like 44% foreign born. So if you don't have good local politics and good international politics, it really does affect people here. So, that's what we're here to talk about today, I guess.
Hmm. Sounds good. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your political background and maybe some of the political work you've been doing.
So, I mean, political background, like, I feel like I'm mostly just like everybody else. I've done like some small things, like, I've been in like the tenant association of my building, things like that. I used to be, I went to architecture school, and I did like some minor work in housing advocacy. And I went to like these housing for all marches and stuff like that in New York City. The protests in 2020, mostly as an onlooker, you know, like as an additional person, not like as a primary organizer. And then in 2020, after I lost my job during the, you know, Corona, I ended up spending a lot of time at home. And I was like in bed for like a month or something because COVID hit me really hard. And then after that, I started going on YouTube, and that's how I started to meet a lot of people.
Right on, right on. It sounds good. I apologize to everyone who's watching. I haven't been going live like I should. I just want to put in the plug why we got a few people in here. Please like this video, please share this video, and please get in the comments, and we'll give you a shout out. Shout out to brother Ramiro Sebastian Funes. He has a great channel with the program Unmasking Imperialism. I highly recommend that. So let's get back into our conversation. I know you sent me some links. What were the issues you wanted to talk about today?
So I want to talk. Well, Alex, he told me, he was like, "Oh, I'll talk about Peru, and you can talk about Argentina because I'm Argentinian American, and I can maybe talk about it better than some people, not as well as others." I didn't follow the corruption trials against Christina Kirchner that closely. I felt like it was a lot of political theater. So it's not like I can tell you item by item exactly, you know, what was involved in the trial, but I can explain a little bit about what is actually happening there right now, and why it's really important for Latin America, because Peru and Argentina, like both of these things happening at the same time, these things kind of come in waves, and it's rarely kind of an isolated situation, like when you can see things like this happen in more than one country at the same time. And a lot of these political corruption trials are actually kind of very staged, and a purposeful type of political persecution. You know, like, I don't know if you remember when Donald Trump, there was like that whole impeachment thing, like they were, you know, trying to drum up these charges saying that Trump made a phone call to the Ukraine. They made this huge big deal out of it. And look at what's happening now under Joe Biden. Like, every Ukrainian citizen has basically had to leave Ukraine. They've evicted millions of people from their country, but they wanted to impeach Trump over a phone call. Now, it's a very different situation, like that kind of political theater, because that kind of was staged against the right-wing candidate here, whereas in Latin America, in Peru and Argentina, it's kind of staged more against the center-left. But it's a similar kind of thing. You know, they have these like public trials. It's all a bunch of garbage because, you know, like it doesn't mean that the Republicans aren't corrupt or the Democrats aren't corrupt here, or it doesn't mean over there that the center left is perfect and not corrupt and that the right wing is, you know what I mean? But it is like a lot of political theater. These trials that they had against Christina Kirchner, they were going for 12 years. They couldn't find anything to pin on her. And finally they found this contract with Lazaro Baez, who's like a construction manager in the province of Santa Cruz, which is all the way, it's in Patagonia. And they are basically alleging that there was a pay-to-play situation. It's kind of, I don't know if you know that much about New York City politics, but Bill de Blasio, for example, he was accused of the same thing, where basically construction management companies, and I worked for a company like this actually, they apparently pay city officials for the contract. So there's kind of like a pay-to-play situation because corruption is extremely normalized in the construction industry. So a lot of these companies, they can't get contracts unless they pay. So what happened to me was, like, I was working at this place and they were like, oh, we're going to get these school construction authority contracts. And we're going to get this contract. We're going to get this contract and you're going to have lots of work. Well, what ended up happening was that they discovered that the CEO of the company where I was working, it was called like Hacks Engineers. They had paid Bill de Blasio for that contract, but they discovered that. And then the CEO went to like jail for a little while. I didn't get the work, right? Because I was like a minion in that office. The SCA contracts never came through, and it's like a local corruption issue because there's like a pay to play kind of corruption thing going where these construction companies kind of make deals with the government. It's always been that way in the construction industry, and I'm not saying that to say that it's okay. What I'm saying is that it happens with every single political party. So what happened in Argentina is that they couldn't pin anything on Cristina Kirchner for many, many years. And they still haven't really pinned anything on her here because Lazaro Baez, he also like already went to jail for this. And they really couldn't like figure out like how the whole thing led to Cristina Kirchner, but they got her on these charges, and the penalty is like six years in jail and prohibition of seeking political office again, which is actually the bigger penalty. Isn't the 6 years in jail, is the prohibition of seeking political office again. The reason for that is because she's one of the most popular politicians in Argentina, no matter how much shit they pin on her. And that's one of the things that's really important to understand. So that's why I came up with this Twitter thread where I started, where I wanted to show you guys exactly why the Kirchners are so popular in Argentina as the center left, and compare that to the center left in the United States, which is not popular at all, and why that is.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about Argentinian politics. I know the person you're talking about is progressive. To me, the main difference is who they work for. I mean, we're in the center of monopoly capitalism, imperialism. Monopolies here, destroy this country, and then overthrow governments, carry out wars, and all of them are involved. Even the ones that don't receive the corporate funding, to get to that stage, to get to have the power to be in the Congress, and the way the power structure is, just simply to stay in that power structure, they're beholden to this thing, especially when the people here have no power and aren't organized. And I look at, in Latin America, that's not the case. I mean, yes, there are politicians who do the willing of the United States, but anybody in Latin America that's siding with their people against imperialist exploitation and trying to, lift conditions, they're going to come into conflict with the U.S. imperialists, and they're going to do exactly that. They're going, they've been doing the coups against first Hugo Chavez and now Morales, the tax on Nicaragua, the tax on AMLO in Mexico, which I know a little bit more about. I mean, you can look at, the right wing media. There's been attempted coups against AMLO in Mexico, and he is, basically a social democrat. He's progressive. He has some working class backing. I think that's really where I really see, like, if we're going to talk more holistically, if a social democrat can come into power in the bourgeois state in Latin America, if they can do something good for the people and like get the people behind them, they can stay in power. I mean, we recently had the coup in Peru. I think Alex was going to talk on that, but I tend to be, my position is, I really hate these third worldist purity politics. If it ain't perfect socialism, it ain't what I want. It ain't what I want to support. I'm a working class guy who wants to improve my conditions, and when I see people like the Chinese Communist Party, I see the people in Nicaragua, the people in Venezuela, and I look at the material conditions about how they have improved conditions for poor people, for black and brown people, in a real way, that people like AOC and Bernie Sanders haven't been able to do, but they're the ones criticizing them. They're the ones calling, they're the one. I think what was it? Sanders called Chavez a dead dictator at one point. I mean, it's ridiculous. Maybe you just kind of respond and kind of vibe on that.
Well, that's basically the thing. Like the U.S. left, and you can say that about Bernie Sanders, even more about AOC, has absolutely like no relationship to the international left, right? So in Latin America, when something like this happens, if something happens in Peru, for example, where Pedro Castillo gets ousted, it's like, the center left basically. You'll hear the Kirchners say something in support of Peru. If something happens to AMLO, you'll hear in Venezuela, Evo Morales say something in support of the president of Mexico. You never hear that from Bernie Sanders or AOC. You never hear them support the leaders of other countries that are considered popular in other countries. People like Nayib Bukele in El Salvador, people like Imran Khan in Pakistan. You'll never hear any of that support, because these people, like you said, they're imperialists. They have no desire to ally with any kind of center left or far left or medium left or even a little bit left or even conservative but popular among the people. They have no desire to create any alliances outside of the United States. And that's what's different about the U.S. left and other countries. Me and Alex, we see this issue with Peru and Argentina as and the reason we're doing this show together is because there's a need for solidarity right now between Peru and Argentina. These are very similar situations. Obviously, they're different in the way that each country is characterized, but they're similar in that they're kind of soft coups. There was kind of like an attempt by the judicial branch to essentially take these leaders out, but not in the aggressive way that happened in the coups of the 70s and 80s. This is a more kind of manufactured thing where they'll do a lot of political theater, similar to the way they did here with the impeachment of Donald Trump. But that's usually wielded against the center left and not the conservative branch.
Yeah, this is your second time bringing up the Trump impeachment, and maybe we could talk a little bit on that. Looks like we got Alex with us. Let me go ahead and hey Alex, thanks for coming on. I'm gonna go ahead and finish the point we were talking about the Trump impeachment. And what bothered me about the Trump impeachment was not that Trump was impeached. And Trump is, he came out, basically calling Mexican people, the immigrant community, saying they weren't sending their best and how, they're criminals and rapists and stuff. And I thought that was racist and disgusting. He continued the wars, he murdered Soleimani. But what are they going to impeach him over? A quick pro quo because he paused funding to Nazis in Ukraine? And then you got and I saw and then I saw communists out there making fun of Putin, who is allied with Venezuela, allied with Nicaragua, allied with Iran, sending fertilizer and sending seeds and wheat to the people of Africa, to help them.
And also there was these missiles. There was these very lethal missiles that Trump was pressured to send to Ukraine to fight the ethnic Russians with, and he relented and he went and sent those missiles. So at almost every turn, he gave into pressure to implement imperialism. So Trump might have been an isolationist, like kind of against NATO in that sense, and that was a good thing. But he was not an anti-imperialist, because isolationists tend to be racist. They want to close the borders. So some people mistook his isolationism with anti-imperialism, but those two positions are quite different.
Very well said. I think he, under pressure, he actually increased the funding to the Nazi-controlled government in Ukraine. Lucy, maybe you can finish that thought and we can have Alex speak.
Well, I mean, you pretty much said it. Like, they wanted to get him for out of all of the things he did, to impeach him over the separation policy that they complained about for 4 years. No, you can't impeach him over that because Democrats have done very similar things, right? You've seen it with like the border policies right now, where they were like kicking Haitians back over the border and things like that. But what did they ultimately want to impeach him for? This quid pro quo for Ukraine. And it's very clear now that we're under the Biden administration that whatever Biden had planned for Ukraine was way, way worse. So it's just very clear that the impeachment of Donald Trump had no legs to stand on. I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I don't like Donald Trump, but this is very, very clear at this point. Donald Trump, like it or not, according to election rules of this country, which, by the way, I'm against. I'm not a fan of the Electoral College. I think it's ridiculous. I think it should be one person, one vote nationally. But according to the election rules, he won the election. So what they're doing here is like trying to normalize the process with the theatrical political trial.
Are you talking about 2016 or 2020?
2016.
Okay, good.
so he was elected, right? So they're basically trying to override the will of the people. Like, we're like getting closer and closer to the point where, how John Bolton wanted to run recently for president. Like at this point, they just want like the actual, the deep state. Like previously they had kind of they wanted a popular person to mask the deep state. And now they're just like going out into the open. They're like, no, John Bolton, I'm the one that's been running the show in the background all of these years. I want to be in the front now. So this is like what we're going towards. We're normalizing it to where the president doesn't even have to be popular. That's where I see it going.
Yeah, I think we should finish this discussion on Argentina before we go on to with Alex.
Can I put my 2 cents in on the topic real quick? She mentioned Haiti. I just wanted to make a quick point. So you remember the images during the Trump regime of the cowboys, basically vigilantes, that were whipping Haitian refugees at the border. And how did the Democrats respond once they took power again? They said, "Oh, just get rid of the whips, hit them with something else." That's reformism. Reformism is let's make the PR look better, but continue to repress these people. So I agree with Lucy that Democrat, Republican, they're doing the same thing. The Democrats are doing it in a little more light way, or at least appearing more light, but the consequences are the same.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. This is supposed to be the beacon of democracy that spreads democracy throughout the world. Donald Trump was elected on the popular college, not the popular vote. And then the Democrats said, "Oh, he wasn't really elected. The Russians influenced it." And then later when he lost, "Oh, massive voter fraud." Like there's some kind of it's comical, weird breakdown. And then you have these fake leftists, AOC, the Squad, and Sanders, who just back the mainstream race just equally as racist. I mean, Biden isn't any the people say, "Oh, Trump was openly racist." Biden has been openly racist for a long time. I mean, this is crazy the way corporate media gets us gets the so-called left to back as segregationists. So maybe let's finish up on Argentina. Maybe you can just if you had to explain, the situation and what we can draw from that in a few sentences.
Because Lucy, you were actually born there, right?
No, I was born here.
But your family's from there.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well.
So I don't know if I can pull up the tweet, so I feel like it's easier for me. I don't.
I was trying to do that earlier.
Okay, I'll just.
Yeah, if you want to talk for a little bit while I try to plan that out.
Okay, so I think basically, like, in order to sum this up quickly, I don't know how quickly I'll be able to sum it up, but I would say like the modern political arc of Argentina is really like strongly, like one of the big things that you have to understand is the financial crash of 2001. So the financial crash of 2001, it was similar to the housing crash in the United States. Like all of these junk loans and stuff like that. And over there, it was really a lot of like IMF loans, development loans, things like that, that the country was in default. But the difference between when any other country is in default versus when the United States is in default is in the United States, they keep raising the debt ceiling. And you also have the supremacy of the dollar, which is basically what allows different countries, what allows the United States to keep running the way it is. What has allowed basically the upper middle class in the United States to remain almost completely untouched, even as like the working class is losing everything. There is still a sector of the United States where people don't lose everything. And that's not the case in Argentina. Because when the financial crash happened, it was really total default. There were no one was untouched, not even the upper middle class, if that makes sense. So basically, I actually lived there. The only time I lived in Argentina was like right after the default. And it was absolutely crazy. Like I saw things that I hadn't ever seen in my life. Like I was sitting down at Christmas dinner and I saw a truck drive into an auto parts store and take everything. The degree of insecurity, of poverty, and of theft, it like really made people paranoid. It was extremely volatile situation, extremely volatile.
In 2002, I was living in Peru, and I witnessed the Argentines that arrived into Peru because of the economic chaos that was happening in that country. So that's interesting. We're both in South America around the same time.
Yeah, and like during that same time, just to like tell you another crazy thing, there's like the suburban rail, which is similar to New Jersey Transit or something like that, like that goes into the capital city. So my family, we live outside of Buenos Aires in like what's called the Great Buenos Aires, which is like the part of the state which lost the most jobs. That used to be the driving force of like the Argentinian economy, but lost the most jobs during the financial crash. And you had people like throw 2 logs in the refrigerator into the suburban rail, and half of the train keeps going, and the other half they jump on to rob all the passengers. Like it was like the Wild Wild West. So I'm just like trying to like explain the environment before the Kirchners arrived. Okay. There were like 5 presidents that quickly went into power and got out of power during that time period, and they all failed until finally the Kirchners were elected into the government. Okay, the Kirchners are not supposed to, they don't even call themselves like revolutionary or socialist or anything like this. They're just basically kind of center left Argentinian style populists, but that did a significant break from the presidency of Carlos Menem, which was also came with the Peronist party, but was like basically injected neoliberalism into the Peronist party, a complete disaster, equivalent to what the Clintons would have been here, for example, like with all that mess with NAFTA and all of that shit. So basically, what happened there with the Kirchners is that the Kirchners came in and they started passing a lot of populist policies. They're not perfect. It's not like the center left is not corrupt. There's a lot of like legitimate criticisms of the Kirchners and of the administration, et cetera, but they were voted in 4 times. If you can compare to the United States, the last time somebody was voted in 4 times, that was FDR. Nobody gets in 4 times for nothing. So that's important to understand.
Let me ask you something, Lucy. Isn't 95% of the economic problems in Argentina right now because of Macri? Because he brought back the IMF loans that the Kirchners were able to pay off with the help from Venezuela. So the fact that he got the neoliberal loans at high interest from the IMF again that the Argentina didn't even need at the time, he left that economic disaster now for Alberto Fernandez and Cristina Fernandez to have to clean up, right?
Well, I wouldn't say all of it is because of them, but yes, a large part of it is because of them. So Macri was the administration that was there beforehand. And they have a more neoliberal approach, similar to Bolsonaro in Brazil, where it's just like no holds barred capitalism, like disaster capitalism. That's what people call it in Argentina, disaster capitalism. And disaster capitalism in Argentina is extremely unpopular, regardless of like your people's personal views on abortion or this or that. These are like social things that in like American politics, they've been able to divide people on race, views on abortion.
By the way, just so
LGBTQ.
people aren't confused, they don't know all the names of South America. I know Dust knows, I know, but for the listeners that don't know, when she says Kirchners, she's talking about right now the vice president, because her complete name is Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, and her late husband, Nestor Kirchner, was the center-left Peronist who had his wife as the president after he died, and they did good things. They helped bring the economy back. The problem was when Macri from the right-wing party took over. Like I said, he took out those IMF loans, even though they already paid him off, and now they're blaming all these economic problems on Alberto Fernandez, who's more of a centrist, probably a little right to the left. And they're going after Cristina, but they're unfair to both of them, right? Because the majority of these problems now is because they have to pay back these loans that Macri unnecessarily imposed on the country, right?
Yeah, and like I just wanted to go over these tweets because I just want to compare it to the US, because like I was like, how do I make this simple for Americans to understand? So we have a situation here in the US where it's like, even if you vote for a social democrat, you're not even voting for a social democrat, because you saw with the Squad and Bernie Sanders how they voted against the railway workers very recently. They voted to break the strike, right? So you're not getting even incrementalism with these people. Over there, you have a situation where you still do have some level of incrementalism. But what I mean by that is like some popular policies. And that's why people keep voting for these people. So, for example, the first tweet over there, above this one, above Evo.
Okay, I'll bring it back up. There we go.
Is that...
Well, yeah. Believe in president.
So during the Kirchners' time in office, they founded 18 national universities. And not just any university, free public college. Where do we hear about this over and over again in the United States? Bernie Sanders came out, he said, free public college, free public college. They haven't done shit. In Argentina, the Kirchners, they founded 18 national universities with the idea, too, that you would have one national university in each state and at least 7 in the area around the Buenos Aires region. So, for example, like my cousin's kids, they are now going to those national universities. They don't have to travel for 3 hours to go to the university in the central city because of the free public college that the Kirchners founded after 2001. So that's like a very concrete thing that the working class gained because of the Kirchners. And so the free public college, the university system, was hugely expanded under the Kirchners. Okay? Then you have the alliance with Evo Morales in Bolivia. When Evo Morales was ousted in Bolivia, he sought refuge in Argentina. Alberto Fernandez took him in. So you have like not just a national politics the way that you have it in the United States, but they make alliances with other countries.
It should be mentioned that AMLO in Mexico was the first to rescue Evo, because even though Alberto Fernandez wanted to help, he was just the president-elect then. Macri was still in control. Macri did not want to receive Evo, so they had to send him on a plane to Mexico. But then right after Alberto took power, he brought in Evo and helped facilitate eventually his return to Bolivia.
Right. So that's like a second concrete example of how they helped a neighboring country. Okay. Then you have this third one. This happened 2 days ago. Cristina Kirchner welcoming Joseph Farrell, ambassador of WikiLeaks, who was trying to reclaim liberty for Julian Assange. That happened 2 days ago. So you have an international alliance where Cristina Kirchner is basically opening the doors for all of these people that are advocating for Julian Assange.
Lula as well. Lula wants to help Assange as well. He's going to take over next month.
And then you have Nestor Kirchner, Cristina Kirchner, and how they basically challenged the IMF and junk loans and got a lot of them forgiven. because the situation in 2001 where Argentina was in default and they said, we cannot pay this debt and we will not pay this debt, which is a situation that we're here in the United States. We have similar situations with housing debt, student debt, medical debt. There's a point where you just can't pay these corporations. You can't do it. And you need kind of a strong populist party that will negotiate against the big banks. Now, Christina Kirchner, basically the way they deal with her is they have kind of like a politics of personality against her, where they say things like she's so arrogant, she's so obnoxious, she has a boob job, she has liposuction, all of this and that, right? Typical Argentina, Brazilian style, whatever. Like a lot of the women, they like to, get plastic surgery. But people don't care. The people that are going to the free public colleges don't care. The people that have gotten loans forgiven don't care, because the Kirchner family, even if they're not perfect, they have actually pursued policies that are really beneficial to the Argentinian working class. And the Argentinian working class doesn't give a shit about this like politics of politeness that they want to like roast her.
Let me ask you, Lucy, and of course, Dust, if you want to ask me something right after, that's fine too. But a lot of people that have more support for Evita Perón, who actually came from a working class background, was far more progressive than her husband Juan Perón. They tend to be from the leftist strand of Peronism, or at least center left, as you described. The right wing ones are more in line with Juan Perón himself, whose second wife actually took over after he died, who was like almost like a fascist. I mean, almost, because she was deposed by fascists later, and so was Juan Perón. I wouldn't say Juan Perón was ever fascist. He was kind of conservative. But isn't that like kind of the personality split? You have the Peronists that are more in line with the Evita Perón, as opposed to Juan himself.
I feel like this happened so long ago. This is like history from the 40s and 50s. Definitely, like in Argentina compared to Venezuela, like it's not a communist country, because that's not how the populist forces took hold. Just like in the United States, it never happened that way. We had like a more FDR like figure, which is what grew into the Peronist party. Okay, but it's not like Juan Perón. I mean, it gets complicated because he kind of was part of the military. So I would say he's kind of, not really, but like a little bit like a Tulsi Gabbard figure, like somebody that has some right-wing support. Wait, let me finish.
Sorry, go ahead.
Somebody that had some right-wing support because of their position in the military. So like vets, they like other vets, if that makes sense. Like people that are in the army. He had some like right-wing support, but I wouldn't call him a right-winger.
Right. I was going to say that there's been military leaders in Latin America in recent history, like Torrijos in Panama and Velasco in Peru, like in the 70s. And even in Bolivia, one time they had a leftist military leader in the late 60s. So there's been some progressive military figures. Just because they're in the military doesn't mean that they're necessarily right wing. I mean, even Chavez himself had a military background. But
yeah, like I mean, he was a little bit more right. They call him more right wing than Evita, but like he wasn't really right wing. Like he was kind of more influenced by his position in the military, if that makes sense. So he was able to attract kind of more conservative leaning people. But what I would say, like what's more necessary to understand right now is the financial crash of 2001 and how that led into the Kirchners. That even though the Kirchners aren't perfect, the opposing parties have been an absolute disaster. So like that's what you have to understand with Argentina, and basically their approach to a lot of policies, debt forgiveness, free public college, things that we don't have here in this country. So that's what's really important to understand with Argentina. And there's also, especially in the United States, if you look up her name, Christina Kirchner, every American periodical hates her. If you look up Washington Post, they'll talk about how they've held power for so long, and the Kirchners, it's like, well, why have they held power for so long?
You think they'd have sympathy for having to suffer an assassination attempt, but it's terrible.
Yeah, they fought. Yeah, she suffered an assassination attempt. She fought against the big banks. They instituted free public college, debt forgiveness, all of these different kind of populist policies. Are they perfect? No. There are third parties in Argentina that are kind of like, you know, the Kirchners are incrementalist and we need like a sea change in our politics, all of that shit. But I would say compared to the United States, where I'm getting to the point where it's like Bernie Sanders, AOC, all of these people are garbage. They're not even worth a vote. Over there, it's like incrementalism, but they're still doing things. They're still building free public colleges, right? There are things that they're doing that kind of further human rights as a whole. They also passed the first abortion law. That's really significant because they had a tagline called safe, legal, and free, and they codified it into national law under the Kirchners. In the United States, it's still not codified. This was passed in
I'm
the 60s.
going to be right back.
So, like, you know, these are all things that you can see kind of like the direct relationship between the United States. The Clintons, they said that they were going to defend abortion. They passed this tagline. It was called safe, legal, and rare, which was a concession, right? In Argentina, they passed it during coronavirus, actually in 2020. Very Catholic country, conservative, right? Socially conservative. But they passed it with the tagline safe, legal, and free, where you have abortion up until 3 months, I think. It's still not what people, liberals here, expect. It's not like up until 9 months. But you can get it. You have the right to choice up until 3 months, and it's free. So that's like, and it's codified at the national level. It's not a state-by-state thing. So those are all examples of things the Kirchners done, like concessions, like big concessions that the Kirchners that made, and that's why they got elected 4 times. And that's why they're going to keep getting elected. Cristina Kirchner can keep getting elected forever in Argentina. And that's why they have to pass a rule that she can no longer run for public office as part of this like kind of judicial coup against her. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, did they make it?
Yeah, I thank you so much for explaining that. Yeah, I mean that's really beautiful and that's well said. I was indoctrinated with anti-communist propaganda. And part of the reason why I became a communist is because I witnessed communists were the most effective union organizers. They were the people most militantly fighting to raise the conditions of working people. And if you look at the United States labor movement, that's absolutely the case. The biggest, most militant unions were led by the communists. And that's what led me into becoming a communist. And, you know, the way of scientific socialism is understanding how history progresses, how systems advance. It's not some kind of moralistic, I believe in the best type of the perfect communism and only this leader has ever been it. I mean, as an anti-imperialist, if you're improving the conditions of oppressed people, you're taking money directly out of the hands of monopoly capitalists that are keeping folks down here. And it is absolutely beautiful and inspiring. Free college for the Argentinian people, the right to abortion for our sisters. This is beautiful progress, and it's great to see that people get behind it. And we need more shows like this to call out the media that is attacking this progressive. And then they praise these fake progressives that ain't got none of that. You know, so right on point. It's great to hear from you.
Yeah, and one of the people that I would call the libshits that's like leading the charge against Cristina Kirchner is this guy, I don't know if you know him, David Pacman, also Argentinian American, hates the Kirchners with a passion, will not mention on his show any of these social gains that were made. And at this point, he actually was even, if you go look at Bad Empanada, guilty of furthering conspiracy theories about how the assassination attempt against the Kirchners is fake news. Even though it's already documented that it was a real assassination attempt, this guy, like, he was like wearing the black sun. If you look at the at Jose, he like called Jamal Bowman out for this, Jose Vega, and he talked about how the assassination attempt, this guy was wearing the black sun, the neo-Nazi like black sun
that the Ukrainians use.
That the Ukrainians use. So you have these like neo-Nazi groups, you know, and they're all over the place. You know, they're like in Ukraine, in the United States, they're in, you know, the Buffalo shooting, they're in Argentina. And like, this is a real thing. They have an international coalition. So that's why it's so terrifying when people like Bernie and AOC, people call them leftists, whatever. They have no international coalition. Especially AOC as Puerto Rican, she should have some kind of idea with a district that's 60% Hispanic. What's going on in Latin America? Who are our allies? That's not the history of the South Bronx. That's not the history of the Bronx.
Did you mention when I wasn't here that you're considering running against her as a Green because you're in her district?
So I'm asking the Greens if they have nominated anyone, and I haven't heard back from them. And I talked to the lady that you talked to about whether they have nominated anyone, and I haven't heard back from them. If they've already nominated,
is a very busy person, but I'm sure she'll get back to you soon.
Yeah, like if maybe they're already nominating somebody, and then I'll just back that person. I just feel like it would be good to have somebody like on YouTube, on some of these channels, saying, "Why is this woman bad? She has no relationship to any kind of international left." That's important here. Like when AMLO won, like we have a lot of Mexicans on my block, for example. There were fireworks in my neighborhood when AMLO won. It is really important to draw those connections for people, because there's a lot of immigrants, and like for people to understand that this isn't kind of an isolated movement where we're just only going to talk about local incremental things like expansion of healthcare or something. Like people here vote on another metric. So like, and we have no candidates that represent that. And AOC is not even the best expression of that. Like in the South Bronx, there was another candidate called Jose Serrano, and he actually did coordinate with Chavez to bring cheap heating to the South Bronx. So the Bronx has that kind of history. This is not like a place where we're isolated when it comes to understanding these international politics. But when you have these like Teflon celebrity activists like AOC, they don't bring that in. They don't talk about these things. So people assume that we're like limited here or something, but we're not.
Why I've taken a personal offense to AOC is because she called herself a socialist. She prides herself in being Latina. And I'm a Latin socialist in the United States. And to me, you have to be an anti-imperialist to be a socialist. And she never talks about imperialism. She's very out of touch with the Latin American struggle. And that's why I think we need somebody from the left with the Greens or as an independent to rise up against her, because she's disappointed a lot of people. The DSA have not rescinded their endorsement of her. There are some DSA revolutionaries. Some of them were in Venezuela with me last year. Some of them met with Maduro. But you see a lot of reformists in the DSA that use their influence in the leadership to prevent the rescinding of endorsements from people like AOC for her betrayal of the rail workers, for her, not being an anti-imperialist, not taking principal positions on sanctions, against progressive countries like Venezuela. So yeah, I think we need somebody to run against her. I think that movement building. I used to think movement building was equally as important as electoralism. Now I think movement building's more important. However, electoralism still has a role, especially in third parties. So I think, somebody running against her would be a good idea in that regard.
Yeah, and even with the Puerto Rico stuff, like she said she supported a non-binding vote on statehood. What's the point of a non-binding vote? You can see like the language, the shit that the Democrats come up with. They want you to vote on something that's non-binding. What's the point of voting then?
And she doesn't support independence of Puerto Rico. I don't think she's ever even met with Oscar Lopez Rivera. Oscar Lopez Rivera, who I met a few months ago, he was in prison longer than Mandela, almost 40 years. And he's supporting right now Venezuelan and diplomat Alex Saab. I was at his trial today in Miami, although I came on to talk more about the situation in Peru. But the point is, people like Oscar Lopez Rivera, who was pardoned by Obama, AOC won't meet with them. So I don't think she supports the independence of Puerto Rico. I don't think she supports, anti-imperialism in Latin America. So I don't know what socialism she's talking about. People said, well, she supports workers. She's a domestic socialist. Oh, yeah, she just betrayed the rail workers. So it's like, it's not even like minuscule socialism. Like, where's the socialism here?
Well, she was there to pose for a picture with the people that supported the coup against Bolivia. And
exactly.
She did that. And the only reason she
reversed her Bernie was actually against the coup in Bolivia.
Right.
Bernie was against the coup in Bolivia. She went to the right of Bernie. Yeah.
Right. She went to the right of Bernie on Bolivia. And in a district where everybody knows Bolivia, and by the way, the left in Bolivia is even more popular than Venezuela because they don't have sanctions against them, and they actually geared their economy very well under Morales. They had eliminated a lot of childhood poverty and stuff like this, and they nationalized certain industries. Like they were able to. They built a lot of affordable housing complexes in Bolivia that didn't exist before, like whole buildings, where people previously had nothing, like no housing, or no official housing, basically. So Evo Morales also has some failures, but hugely popular because of a lot of the reforms that he made. And it's unacceptable for her to be against that administration. Like you should not even.
I would say Evo Morales was even greater than Rafael Correa. Rafael Correa was great in Ecuador, but what Rafael Correa did was he would make multinationals pay. They used to pay 20% taxes, and the Ecuadorians have to pay the 80%. He reversed it, so 80% went to Ecuador if they wanted to remain in the country, and 20% went to their pockets. So that was a good thing. But what Evo Morales tended to do was nationalize, which I think is even better. So they, you had great leaders like that emerge, but these countries were not sanctioned like you see against Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela. So they had to push back against that. Unfortunately, Ecuador has gone right, but like every major country in Latin America now, especially South America, has gone left, although Peru has recently gone to the center. Can I go ahead and touch on that, on the coup and what happened in Peru?
Yeah. I had a clarify, just to add onto the Lucy's point. Bolivia was the fastest under Evo Morales' leadership, economic coordination, nationalization of several key sectors. Under his leadership, Bolivia was the fastest growing economy in Latin America. And they were allied with the Chinese and receiving Chinese loads and infrastructural development. And also their record on indigenous sovereignty is amazing. We're fighting over here in the United States about the land back movement, and it's been kind of divisive in the left. We look at these socialists in Latin America; they've been able to do things to grant autonomous rights and indigenous rights and preserve indigenous cultures in Bolivia and in Nicaragua. The people, socialists in Latin America, are on the ground doing these things, and we can.
And his economic minister is now president of Bolivia. So Evo Morales' economic minister Arce is now president there. So that's a good thing.
What I would say, people might not want to hear this, but if you want like a good blueprint for the United States, which is similar to Argentina in terms of like the way that basically like Europeans took over land, is you cannot in the United States ever have any kind of indigenous sovereignty if you don't create international alliances, because the Native American population is like a very small part of the United States. In Argentina, it's a little bit larger than here. I would say the Native American population, a lot of people are mixed, more than here with Native American, but it's also a country with a very large white population. Look at me, similar to the US, right? So, but in Argentina, there's more of a concept of the international left. You're not just going to make a kind of like have an isolated national movement. So the indigenous groups in Argentina, they work with Bolivia, Brazil, Paraguay, etc., you're not alone anymore. It's not the same exact situation. In the United States, they want to basically fighting for land back alone.
I have a really good question for you, Lucy.
Yeah.
I have a really good question for you about Argentina. So a lot of people, when they were complaining about the fact that Milagros Salas, who was an ally of the Kirchners, was still in prison once Alberto Fernandez took over, who's not related to Cristina Fernandez, by the way. They're part of the same party, but Fernandez is a common surname in Latin America, for those that don't know. But, so a lot of people complain when Alberto Fernandez took over because she was a political prisoner under Macri, Milagros Salas. She's an Inca activist. And so that nothing was done, or that she just went to house arrest, but she was still, still wasn't free on the trumped up charges. And when they complained about that, the usual answer was, well, the courts will never go after, the government. We'll have to just figure out what we'll do with Milagros Salas later on. And we saw the result of that, right? Now the courts have gone after Cristina. They sentenced her for 6 years. She's too old to go to jail because I guess when you're 70, you can't go to jail anyway. So it's symbolic in that regard. But they also barred her from running for office for life, which is hopefully reversed, right? They tried to do the same thing with Lula. But now the courts have gone after the government.
Like, I think Alberto Fernandez, it's very clear, like, he made way too many concessions to the right. Now they went after Cristina. I think that the Kirchners were at their best. Nestor Kirchner, more than Cristina, actually, who died, is really like the modern political hero of Argentina is Nestor Kirchner, not even Cristina. Mm-hmm. But Cristina, as his late wife, she kind of took over after him. But she's the vice president. She doesn't even have the same power that Alberto Fernandez has. And Alberto Fernandez is somebody that attracts more conservative, neoliberal votes, etc. He makes more concessions than the Kirchners did. Cristina Kirchner, I'm not sure if Milagros Salas would still be in jail if Cristina Kirchner was currently president. She really is that ticket was not going to win without Cristina, if that makes sense. She is really the popular politician, but at the same time, there are reactionary people and also people that are kind of third party, and they'll say, okay, if the Kirchners have been here for so long, which is a legitimate argument, why is there still poverty in Argentina? Why is 40% of Argentina still poor? If they were there so long, they didn't fix it. So there's still a lot of stuff that's systemic, that people still blame the Kirchners for, even though they're slightly better, I guess, than the Macristas. But I don't know. It's complicated, but I think Alberto Fernandez is you can see, especially with this judicial coup, that Alberto Fernandez he does not fight as hard. He is not really
he's kind of weak, right? I mean, and also it's important to understand not all Argentine people are lighter skinned or European descent, right? I mean, in the interior of the country, you have a number of Mapuche indigenous people, and there's even Inca people in the north of Argentina, which is part of Milagros Salas's group. So there's still some indigenous people there.
I think people really I see a lot of Americans talking about this because they're racially obsessed. That's what I call them, racially obsessed. I think it's important. It's fine to point out, that there was a genocide, Native American genocide in all of these different countries, including this one. But to me, where the liberals in the U.S. really get lost is they seem to have some kind of superiority complex with the crackers down south, and then they'll start getting into the weeds. These people are so racist. Look at yourselves, first of all. Second, all of the crackers in Argentina could give a shit about this liberal virtue signaling that Americans have going about white people south of the border. Nobody cares down there. There's a more united working class left. There might be people that are racist, but it doesn't prevent them from forming coalitions, which is something that has been completely lost in the United States, because you see how in the United States you have 70% of white women voting for Republicans and 80%, 98% of Black women voting for Democrats, and they vote along racial lines here. That's not what's going on in Argentina. Argentina is really a country where it's 70, 80% votes for the Kirchners. If you are working class in Argentina, you are voting along the same lines, not along racial lines. Yes, there is like I would say there is like a portion of Argentina that is more upper middle class, more macrista, more concentrated in the city of Buenos Aires, but it's also a class thing. It's not just a racial, like it's not just a racial divide the way it is here. So like it's much less stark over there, like the political lines, if that makes sense, along race. Yeah. Like the United States is really the place where they've been able to accomplish this. So I would say to the United States that hyper virtue signal all day about how Argentinians are white, they need to look at Argentina. They need to look at Argentina very closely because it's a very similar country, and figure out how to change their language to do less liberal virtue signaling with white people, to figure out how to get these white people on board, because they're able to do that in Argentina in a way that they can't do that here. And they need to stop criticizing and see what they do differently there. Like, that's my opinion.
I also think that under that here in the United States, we need to have more gatherings and camps and try to have solidarity with one another. Kind of like we tried to do, at Camp Data, where I met you in person, Lucy. We need to work face to face, because all this online stuff, it can be really divisive. But if it's okay with you guys, can I touch on with the Peruvian situation?
Yeah,
I wanted to respond to Lucy quickly, and I really enjoyed this conversation. I mean, I could go into history of how racism has created the material phenomenon of national oppression, where Black people in this country have like a fifth of the resources that white people do. And it's not because of, they're stupid or dumb. It's because of these institutions of national oppression that super exploit black people and our Chicano brothers and sisters in the Southwest. But I mean, a lot of people don't understand that this national oppression were groups of people who, where it is racism that caused this. I can get into the similarities between national and racial oppression. But this oppression of the least amongst us reinforces, the oppression of all workers, including white workers. You want to, solidarity. Injury to one of us is injury to all of us. And if you want to improve conditions for yourself, you got to raise conditions for the least paid and the most exploited amongst us, and rise as a group. That's the only way we can use working class power. And I think if people would go to people and say, instead of saying, "Oh, you're racist, sexist, on stolen land, you're nothing, I'm better than you, I'm a better leftist, I'm a better anarchist," you go to them and say, the fastest growing economy in Latin America was an indigenous leader who used socialist policies to improve people's lives. And that's correct. And I think people can understand that. People can understand that, they want to put their kids through school. We got governments in Latin America, progressive populist governments with coalitions of people getting people free school, improving the conditions, and we need those policies here. And that's something, that's something people can get down with. That's a message that we can get to people. But let's go ahead and end that. What's going on? And did you want to talk about, we don't have a lot of time left, maybe another half hour or so. Did you want to talk about Alex Saab first briefly, or go right into Peru?
I'll go to Peru and I'll end on Alex Saab, if that's okay.
Right on. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, because I already mentioned a little bit of Alex Saab too when I was on earlier, that I was at his trial, but I'll get into that towards the end. So basically a few days ago, one of Pedro Castillo's former vice president. That's important to stress, former. So basically, since day one, let me first off say that Peru is the only country in Latin America. And by the way, my father's from Peru, and I used to live in the country, as I mentioned earlier, in case you're just listening now. But Peru's the only country in Latin America where all you need is 60% of the Congress to impeach. In the United States, you could have the Congress overwhelmingly vote and the Senate to impeach a president, and they still wouldn't necessarily have to leave office. In Peru, all you need is 60%, and there's several third parties that can unite in coalition in Peru to remove fairly easily a president, and they have to leave immediately. It's not like they can't be forced to resign. They're immediately forced to resign once the Congress makes that decision. So they really need to change that law, because that's why you've had 6 Peruvian presidents in 6 years. So Pedro Castillo, who had a Congress dominated by the right, was from day one forced to change his cabinet, forced to, always try to concede to the right. So he himself is a leftist. Like, for example, his first foreign minister, Hector Bejar, actually started a guerrilla group in Peru that joined Che in Bolivia. And Hector Bejar would have went to Bolivia to help Che out at that time as well, but he was a political prisoner in Peru and wasn't released till the military leftist Velasco took over in the late 60s. But that was the first foreign minister of Pedro Castillo, somebody who was a former guerrilla, just like Petro in Colombia is a former guerrilla. And he within a few months, Hector had to resign because, again, the threat of impeachment against Pedro Castillo. And you even need the permission of Congress to leave the country when you're the head of state. So if you have a diplomatic mission, like, for example, they wouldn't let him go to the inauguration of Petro in Colombia. So like they wouldn't let him go to Europe on a bunch of trips that would have been beneficial for the Peruvian economy because of the capriciousness of the Congress run by the Fujimoristas and other far right groups. He couldn't even leave the country and function as a president. So basically, they forced him to be a lame duck president. One of the vice presidents that he picked like a year ago, who was center right, who was thrown out of the party several months ago, Dina Boluarte, she's the new president now. So basically, the right set him up, picked the leader that they wanted, and staged the coup against him. So people need to understand that context of what's going on here. She's not a progressive. She entered his party as an infiltrator, as basically somebody that he was trying to make a compromise with the opposition over. And now they've used her to take over, and they justify it saying, well, she's his vice president. No, she's a former vice president. She wasn't even really a leftist, and she had admitted that. It's kind of like what happened in Ecuador with Lenin Moreno, who was the one responsible for, basically selling out Julian Assange and letting the British enter the Ecuadorian embassy. Lenin Moreno entered a leftist party, but then claimed to be centrist and betrayed Rafael Correa's legacy and did what he did. And so you kind of see that now with Dina Boluarte. Only in Ecuador, like all the other parts of Latin America, it's not so easy to impeach a president like it is in Peru, which results in this destabilization. So they really need to change that. But the Peruvians are starting to rebel and demand the return of Pedro Castillo, who's a humble school teacher, incorruptible. There has been legitimate corruption where presidents deserve to be impeached in Peru, but Pedro Castillo is not one of them. So these trumped up charges against him need to be dropped, and he needs to return to power. That's what I believe. Because this is a setback for the left in Latin America, much like what they did against Cristina with the lawfare, right? Which is warfare using the law, right? Using the courts there against her. So,
yeah,
I can go into. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No,
let's get Alex up next. But go ahead if you want to comment on what I said about Peru.
I wanted to comment quickly on this.
Mm-hmm.
I made this meme. Basically, that it's a little saying. I quote myself, kind of arrogant, but I think it's an important quote. And is, if you apply liberal sensitivities universally, it only goes to favor those who have the most complex corruption and say the biggest lies. So in the United States, where we have, which is heartland of the strongest monopolies in the world that control, exploit resources from all over the world, they have the money for the propaganda machine to cover up their crimes, to essentially obfuscate what they're doing. Like, it's just a more complex system of corruption. But then in Latin America, where you said they don't have this power structure that's this rich and this powerful. It seems like it's more corrupt, but it's just less developed corruption, in the United States. And it's easier and what happens is the monopoly capitalists here manipulate the situation there and use the media to attack the people they don't like. So
even when you have an honest president like Pedro Castillo,
yeah.
I mean, you can't get a guy more honest than him. He was never.
I overstepped Lucy there. Go ahead.
Well, you have a phenomenon. with like Pedro Castillo, who's a school teacher, with the Kirchners. Christina Kirchner is a lawyer, so it's not. But they really kind of, you know, in the U.S. it's different because like the whole personality politics was really more against Donald Trump, like the right wing candidate. Over there, it's really, they do a lot of personality politics where I think Fiorella talked about it too on Convo Couch, where they really look down on these people. It's like, yo, you're a school teacher, and like, you know, they just can't get over it. Like, you know, they really have, it's very classist. Christina Kirchner, people also, Rafael Correa, sometimes you also have leftists that are more educated. You know, I think he was like an economist, Rafael Correa, but very much on the side also, like, you know, of working people, more social democrat kind of, like, you know, tried to pursue policies that helped people. And they still try to they deploy a lot of classism against those people. You know,
a couple things I want to mention about Pedro that I forgot to mention earlier. He's mostly indigenous, which is important to understand. He's from Cajamarca. He's not from Lima, from the coast, where you have a lot of the white oligarchic elites that are backed by the United States, who of course are backing this coup currently. He also, just like Maduro, is a former union leader. So he comes from a very pro-worker background, from humble origins. He was not part of the Peruvian establishment. He's incorruptible. He's principled. But again, they forced him to be a lame duck because of the compromises. He was under the threat of the impeachment the entire time. So Peru needs to look at changing those laws so they don't make it so easy for the Congress to get away with things like that.
Also, like, I feel like it's important, and RBN talks about this a lot, about, like, you know, what was the Rainbow Coalition, you know, who was in it. I think it was the Young Patriots, the Young Lords, and the Black Panthers, right? So you have like 3 different ethnic groups or whatever. In Latin America, you also have like a similar situation with these left coalitions. You have the, you know, like the indigenous movement in Bolivia. You have like the Argentinian, I guess like more working class candidates in Argentina, which, even though there are white people there, it's not the same white people as the white people in Bolivia. In Bolivia, you have kind of a concentrated white population that they're really landowners. They really own a lot of the resources. The province of Santa Cruz. I would say that those white people are similar, I would say, to the upper middle class liberals in San Francisco and New York, right? There are certain white liberals or like white people in the United States too, where you just can't create a coalition with them because it's impossible to deal with them. You can have a working class coalition with white people, but it has to be the right ones. So
the perfect example of a figure who transcended race, who truly represented the working class, who was a white man, was Che Guevara. Che Guevara is adored by African and indigenous people today, and he came from Argentina. So that's a good example right there as well.
I want to clarify a little bit more about the Young Patriots, which was the white group within the original Rainbow Coalition. Not only were they white, but they were poor whites. They were economic refugees from the South. And to this day, the South is one of the poorest areas in the country, along with Aslan, the oppressed nations. And it's the proximity.
And you're in the South. You're in North Carolina.
Yeah, I'm in the South, in North Carolina. And it's the proximity to the Black Belt South, which is the oppressed nation in the South. So
you have like you have like a very similar geographical element here, right? Where you have like in like Bolivia, you have like landowner whites. Really, that's what they are. With the population of Bolivia, which is like 90% indigenous, so like or 80%, very high number. In Argentina, there's kind of a development of something that's similar, I would say, to a Rust Belt, if that makes sense. People that were really badly affected by these international trade policies. You have candidates like the Kirchners that fight against the big banks. It would be as if the Clintons had fought against NAFTA, TPP. You had Argentina reject Obama. Obama visited there. They were booing him because Obama was trying to push the TPP on his visit to Argentina. So he was hugely unpopular. People were like screaming at him to get out of the country. So the Clintons, Obama, all of these figures are seen as neoliberal figures. They're seen as, and like, you know, just like the most anti-national type of politics possible. And they really view them as all the same, like Clinton's, Obama, you know, like just the continuation of all of these free trade policies. In the US, they've kind of played with identity politics to the point where it's almost like there's a lot of people that just ignore that the Clintons brought on NAFTA, TPP, all of these trade deals, extremely damaging to working
I remember
people.
that George W. Bush was so unpopular in Colombia that the only part of Colombia he'd go to was Cartagena. Like if he had traveled to Bogota or other parts, they probably would have run him out of town. And speaking of Colombia, when I was in court today for the first day of the diplomatic status trial on Alex Saab, there was Colombian journalists there, and I had a different encounter with them than when I was at the hearing prior. Because these are from the state Colombian media, and now that there's been a change in government, they were much more sympathetic to Alex Saab, who actually was born in Colombia, but he's a Venezuelan citizen of a Middle Eastern background. And, you know, for those of you who don't know, during the Trump regime, he was captured in Cape Verde Island on the way to fight U.S. sanctions on a diplomatic mission to Iran. And, you know, they tortured him there. And I met actually one of his lawyers from Cape Verde today as well. So I came down to Miami from North Florida today to show my solidarity. And there was some right-wing journalists as well, kind of a nemesis of mine that I mentioned at the beginning. That's before that we were recording. Roberto Denise. He's a terrible person. He's a Venezuelan who blackmailed Alex Saab before Alex Saab was known. He tried to blackmail him. And Alex Saab brought him to court. And rather than face the charges, he escaped to Colombia. With U.S. help. And then he ended up in Miami today, and I recognized him, and he defamed me when I came back from Venezuela last year to observe the elections there, tried to accuse me of being paid by Maduro. So I confronted him about it on video, and a lot of the Venezuelan comrades have shared that already through Twitter. But I have hopes that they're going to release him now because the United States needs Venezuelan oil because of the Russian oil embargo. So there's probably some deal that's going to be reached. I mean, you had a recent swap between Russia, the arms dealer, I forget his name, and Brittany, what's her name, the basketball player that was held in Russia. They had a prisoner swap. So that was good that they negotiated that. And quite possibly Fat Leonard, who's a Malay national, I believe a U.S. resident, who bribed a number of American naval officers. He escaped to Venezuela and thought Venezuela was going to be corrupt, but they arrested him immediately. And so the United States could potentially, in exchange for Fat Leonard, who escaped from house arrest in the United States and ended up in Venezuela, get Alex Saab back. Or they could dismiss the charges. They could recognize him as a diplomat as soon as the 20th of December. And then later, Venezuela could return Fat Leonard to the United States. We'll see. That's quite a nickname, right? Fat Leonard. But yeah, this guy apparently got caught bribing all these naval admirals, and his sentencing took a while, and he was in house arrest still, and he cut off his ankle bracelet and escaped to Venezuela. This happened like a couple months ago, so that's a potential swap right there as well. Yeah, there's some pictures of me at the rally today outside the courthouse in support of Alex Saab. Most of the people that showed up were in support of him, actually, even though we're in Miami, where you have a number of right wingers. So it was interesting today. And I'm going to keep going to it because the trial is going to be going on from Monday to Thursday. And then next week, the 20th, they're going to make a decision on whether he's diplomat or not. If they decide he's not, they're going to continue on with the trial. They could give a date for sometime early next year. If he's convicted, though, Biden wouldn't have to impeach. Right. Biden wouldn't have to pardon him if he's convicted. If he's convicted, they could do a swap right there and then. Or what I really hope is that the charges are dismissed based on the overwhelming evidence that he's a diplomat. They were going through all the evidence today.
So I was looking at the pictures. So there was a small mobilization outside the courthouse. Were you able to get in?
I was in for several hours. I was inside the courthouse for several hours. We had a lunch break and then went back in again.
How was the talking? What was the atmosphere?
Sure. So the defense showed all the overwhelming evidence that Alex Saab was a diplomat since 2018, and the United States changed their tune. The U.S. government's approach, the prosecutor's approach, was no longer, because the evidence was so compelling, They've been saying, that we didn't recognize Maduro when he became a diplomat, that he really became a diplomat in 2019. But the evidence was so strong that he became a diplomat in 2018 when we still had diplomatic relations with Venezuela, that they finally said, he was a special envoy. He wasn't a real diplomat. He was just a temporary special envoy. We don't recognize the special status of the UN, right? And that's actually true because just like the ICC, the International Criminal Court, we don't sign on to it. We don't necessarily sign on to the special status. But regardless, give me an example of when the U.S. has kidnapped a special envoy in a third country and brought him here. It hasn't happened. They call it extradition. It's a kidnapping. So they're trying to use these legal, technicalities of, special envoy versus permanent diplomat to justify what they're doing. And it's pathetic. They're grabbing at straws. I think their case is very weak. I think it's not based on evidence. This is just a political trial. And they're trying to use Alex Saab as a pawn to pressure Maduro, and it's not going to work.
Is it okay if I show some of the video from your Twitter?
Sure. This is Spanish, but I can translate it after. Yeah, there's some brief clips I put up.
Here we go. That's loading. My internet's really slow, and I'm already live.
It's fine. That's when a comrade, Cuban American comrade Carlos, was interviewing me there a little bit. He had interviewed me prior on his.
Aquí en Miami, pidiendo libertad a Alex Saab frente a la corte. Free Alex Saab! 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 Aquí en Miami, pidiendo libertad a Alex Saab frente a la corte.
Very good. Let's see. Hopefully, Lucy comes back. Go ahead and keep talking on. Maybe I'll bring up some more.
No, it's okay. I was just saying it's getting late. I was just saying in the video, he was asking me if all these people here were supporting Alex Saab, and I said yes. Actually at the hearing they had a couple counter protesters. This time there was no counter protesters, so we were the only ones rallying. I mean, you had some right wing journalists that showed up, but they didn't go near us. I confronted one of them. But that's basically what Carlos was asking me, is like, what were there people here today? I said, we're here also for the same reason that we're here, to support the liberation of Alex Saab. So I think it's important for people to pay attention to the case. It has a lot of implications for the future and for diplomacy. I think you could also tie it to the Assange case because they're going after the last of the real journalists. And if they can go after special envoys and diplomats that fight U.S. sanctions in this regard as well, kidnapping them in third countries and bringing them here on trumped up charges, it's a scary precedent. So I think that needs to change. It looks like Lucy had to go anyway, so it's getting late. But yeah, it's great to come on. Sorry I couldn't come on for the whole show. I'll make sure to, when I get a chance, watch the whole thing, see what I missed. And it's great to be here with you, Dust.
Right on, brother. Maybe we can go into a round of conclusions. Hopefully, Lucy can come back. I think a reoccurring theme that we've been addressing, this idea of hyper focus and distortion of not identity politics. I think identity politics can be something powerful, like to see yourself humiliated. Black and brown people to see themselves humiliated for so long, and then see the empowerment of themselves, see themselves as beautiful. Marcus Garvey, black is beautiful. That's identity politics in a good, empowering way. But then the distortion of identity politics of, where it's only about race, where it's only about very superficial things, the way somebody talks, specifically, without that class dynamic that reinforces that national oppression, that our issues, both class and national oppression, can be manipulated to serve our enemies. Malcolm.
And also, why is it a bad thing to be woke? The term actually originated by African American communists, but it's not necessarily bad to be woke. I actually prefer to be woke than dormant, right? To be politically sleeping.
Right on. So I was just saying, Malcolm X, one of his famous quotes said, "If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you loving your oppressor and hating the oppressed." And that's how they use and manipulate our issues to get us to love the Clintons and love Joe Biden and love AOC, but then hate people like the Krishners in Argentina, or hate AMLO, or hate Maduro, people that are actually doing things that are getting free school and housing, improving the conditions of poor Black and brown people in Latin America.
Mark Twain.
Those are the people we got to be looking to. Go
Mark
ahead.
Twain said, "If you..."
Go ahead, brother.
I've got to add on to your quote. It's similar to the quote that you gave earlier. It's a Mark Twain quote. Mark Twain said, "You know, if you don't read the papers, you're uninformed. If you read the papers, you're misinformed."
All right, brother.
So that was before alternative media. But yeah, I mean, Mark Twain had a point there.
So, we're ending it up. Sorry, Lucy, this took so long. We're gonna let Lucy have the last say. Brother Alex, if you just want to give us a quick concluding statement, and then we'll have Lucy take us out.
Okay, I guess the wrapping up statement is
let Alex go first, and then we'll have you take. We'll give you the respect of the last word. All right, go ahead, brother.
Well, I just want to say that people need to go on Google now if they don't know about Alex Saab and put in the words "free Alex Saab." Remember to put "free" because there's a lot of misinformation about him. So you see information from freealexsaab.org, who did a good review of my book, The Diplomat, that's available in 3 languages. It will soon be available in 4 languages. So in places like Cape Verde, Brazil, Portugal, they'll be able to understand the next edition is going to be the Portuguese edition. And I'm going to try to have Dan Kovalik write a forward mentioning Lula for the Brazilian comrades and tying him into Alex Saab for that next book. I talked with Dan about that today, so we'll see. But I think people need to get educated on it, not just read my literature on it. Freealexsaab.org has a lot of great articles about his plight. It has implications for future diplomacy. And I think all of this is related, right? What happened to Christina in recent months, what's happening to Pedro Castillo, what they're trying to do Alex Saab, is they're trying to push back against this left movement that you see going on throughout Latin America, not just in South America, but in Central America, right? With the rise of the left in Honduras, the continual rise of the left in Nicaragua. And so it's all connected. And I think we all need to, here in the United States and the U.S. empire, learn from the Latin American example and try to get our own act together. So I'll leave it like that. So you can go ahead, Lucy.
All right. Yeah, Lucy, go ahead and take us out.
I mean, I think I would say, like a lot of these progressives that people call progressives, you can see how they actively demonize these other leaders in other countries. I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm not saying that there isn't corruption in other like left-leaning governments. But what have the progressives done for us here? Practically nearly nothing. So when they come down on somebody like Pedro Castillo, Cristina Kirchner, etc., they're really coming down on somebody that has more bona fide like proof that they've done something in their country than they've done here. So I feel like we really need to start looking at the receipts, which is why I came with that Twitter thread of like concrete things that the Kirchners have done in Argentina, free public college, codifying abortion as right into law when they haven't been able to do that here. Those are the things that people need to understand. You know, and it's not just Latin America, it's also South Asia, East Asia, a lot of it, like how they're now demonizing China. I'm actually not a huge fan of the Chinese government, but the way they demonize it, they want to erase the fact that China lifted millions of people out of poverty. Those are important statistics. You can't just throw them out, throw the baby out with the bathwater. You have to like understand it. Doesn't mean I want to be China, but I really feel like this is a coordinated personality attack on potential allies that we could have, and we need to throw these progressives out. Bernie Sanders, AOC, forget about them because they don't understand internationalism. So, yeah.
Uyghurs can have as many kids as they want in China, unlike the Han Chinese. So I don't think they have it that bad. But it's been great.
Right. All right, we're getting to the end. Usually I end my show with a so I'm gonna say dare to struggle, and y'all say dare to win. Raise your fist.
This makes me feel cheesy.
All right. All right, ready? Dare to struggle. Y'all say dare to win.
Dare to win.
Dare to win.
All right. All power to the people. Right on. Good night, y'all.
All power of the people. Good night.
All right. Good night.